Okay, we have people coming in. We're just going to wait 1 more minute to let people enter the room, and then we'll be able to start. Okay, just a bit more. Yeah, we have still people coming in, so I'm just going to wait a bit more. Okay, well, I'm just going to start. So, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session. My name is Marion Escriu. I'm a business continuity consultant and organizational resilience for Premier Continuum. And as I mentioned, thank you so much for joining this session today, and thank you for the BCI to supporting us and hosting this event. And it is even more special for us here at Premier Continuum because this webinar is really launching our Insight series where we just share tips and tools to other professionals. So here the purpose, it's really to give actionable insights to other professional, residence professionals, because we really want to create an opportunity for residence professionals to just exchange, share experiences and lesson learn based on what they're doing inside of their own organization. The goal is also to generate ideas, whether it's from our presentation or even through the chat conversation that you might have. And I highly encourage you to do so, to leverage the chat as a tool. And finally, we want to offer concrete solutions. So we want to push them ourselves from the theory here, and which is why we really decided to start this series with operational resilience, as it's still an evolving subject, if I can call it like that. So, well, I would be remiss if I didn't introduce and present Premier Continuum. So we're an organization with more than 25 years of experience in the fields. We have 3 lines of services. So that would be the automation with the software power solution. But we are also certified trainers with the Business Continuity Institute as well as ICOR. And finally, we're a consulting firm. So we assist clients with various type of mandates, ranging from certification to ISO 22231 to implementing a BCMS, facilitating tabletop exercise. So really just a little bit about myself here. So as I mentioned, I'm a business continuity and organizational resilience consultant. I assist organizations mostly in North America, so public and private organization, to develop and implement resilience programs, whether it's ITDR or BCMS, for example. And today I really also have the immense pleasure of having as a guest Marie-Hélène Primo, who's our Executive Vice President here at Premier Continuum. She's been a business continuity and resilience expert for more than 20 years now, and she's also a BCI instructor, as well as the former president of the BCI Canada. And Marie-Hélène also won the Consultant of the Year award with the BCI America Awards this past edition. So thank you, Marie-Hélène, for joining.
Thank you, and looking forward to this session. And please, it's also Marianne's going to be presenting some elements, but please also share. There's a Q&A that you can put your questions in, as well as a chat. Regarding the chat, please make sure that you're actually selecting the everyone, so if everyone can see their comment. But we'll have some time at the end to also look at your questions.
Thank you. So throughout this session, we'll really focus on operational resilience. And like I mentioned earlier, it's really in its practical application. And those practical examples we're using are really based on the key challenges we've identified. We've met with our clients, and this is really the ones that are really coming up the most frequently. And of course, we can't introduce an identified challenge without providing strategies and tips on how to overcome them. So like many of you, I'm sure, I've read the latest report from the Business Continuity Institute regarding operational resilience, so the latest one in 2024. And there was this statement from one person that was interviewed, and the statement was, operational resiliency is an outcome and is the umbrella that sits across good business continuity, good operational risk management, good supplier management, good cyber strategy, and making sure that all your technology is up to date and works as expected. And here we really try to illustrate this with the picture that you see here. So this kind of umbrella that would encompass everything. And this is really, as I mentioned, this statement is really the driver for the presentation because the definition, if it can be called like that, really doesn't specifically target one regulation or one regulation or one law, for example. It definitely encompasses multiple, and it's more about some practices, some business practices, and it's also a good way to differentiate between operational resilience and business continuity, because there's usually difficulties here in understanding the difference between the two. So when I talk about regulation, and here regulation, guidelines, approach, rules, etc., for some organization, it might mean this. So they have to follow the Digital Operational Resilience Act, so DORA in Europe. But for others, sometimes it can look like this. And of course, I'm exaggerating here. But if we look at the latest data from the report that I mentioned, well, we can see that 66.2% of organizations that are interviewed said that they need to comply up to 5 regulations. And for other, it can be more than 5. So 18.4% would be more than 5, which can be really, really hard. And as it's still uncharted territories, if I could say like this, questions about the look of this beast really makes sense and definitely emerges. So just gonna move this here. So when we talk about operational resilience, of course, for some, it's mandatory. So here we're looking at financial institutions, bank, health services, and others. But for others, it's really just a matter of some practice, as I mentioned. And here we could make a parallel to business continuity, for example, because again, for some mandatory, for other, it's not, but it's still in their interest to implement a BCM, for example, in terms of, well, having those practices, those structures in place, those processes, and even for to get the trust of their interested parties, for example. And here currently there is a window of opportunity because, well, we have no guarantee that later on it won't become mandatory also for others sector. That's the opportunity to really build operational resilience for those that are not currently regulated. So here I've gathered some information from the latest report, and this is really just because I'd say it's the current state of operational resilience. So of course we have the 58.5% of organization that would say that they're doing it for good practice purposes, which I definitely think it's a good thing here, and that's something that we should applaud. If we look at the top 5 major challenges of implementing operational resilience, well, here I really want to highlight the first one, that would be the embedding, because, well, we'll definitely touch on that. This is also something that we identify as a challenge here. As I mentioned, in terms of compliance to regulations, so for some it might mean up to 5, other it might mean more than 5, which can become quite a lot. Also, for the top 4 critical essential processes and tools within operational resilience, well, definitely identifying those IBS, those important business services, mapping the dependencies to suppliers, so 88.3%. We have to identify the impact tolerances, and based on those impact tolerances, well, we need to prioritize and work on vulnerabilities that would threaten them. So yeah, that's definitely something here that should be taken into consideration. So here, I just want to stop for a moment on this this slide that on this box that we see here, because I really love to hear from you in the chat with just a yes, no, in terms of whether you think that regulators and governments have done enough And I'll just give you a few seconds here just to say yes, no in terms of this question here. So I'll let you just answer. And here I think I'm not able to see the chat actually. Go. Okay, so we have no, they could do more, Europe, not much, yes, not enough. Okay. Okay, so there is, I think there's still a trend of no, not enough. They should and they could do more clarity. Okay, no, North America. Okay, we have still some yes. Okay, more alignment. Okay, okay, perfect. So thank you for sharing your opinion of this. I think this is really a good benchmark in terms of where we're at currently. So lastly, the tick the box stats. So this one I feel is really important because first of all is resounding 70.6% of yeses, which is definitely a critic again of the regulators, but also because just like the before and after COVID, well, there would be a before and after deadline for implementation. And the question here is, would it be just a mandatory exercise, or if you're good at documenting, then you can just pass? Or should we expect a real change in business practices? And the first thing coming to my mind here would really be ISO 22031 certification. And for some organization, it's just a check the box exercise, but for others, it's really implementing processes, practices, making sure that people are aware. So this is also something just to keep an eye on and to take into consideration. So now we're going to do just a little icebreaker. So it's just two questions for now, because I really want to hear more about you guys in terms of what you think and where you're at currently in terms of operational resilience. So we'll have two questions now. We will have two questions at the end of the session. Um, so I don't know if you know Vivox, but it's just a matter of scanning the QR code that you see here, or you can also go to vivox.app. And just enter the ID session here. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to do this. And after that, you can just keep the window or the tab open and you'll be able to go back to it later at the end of the session. You still have the information related to the QR code and if you want to join later on. So I'm just going to give you the opportunity to join and to scan. So as I mentioned, I have two questions. And the first one would be, is your organization subject to any operational resilience currently? So I'm going to give you the opportunity, to enter. I think I went too fast. Yeah, perfect. It's okay. People are answering. So yes, no, not sure. Okay, I'm just going to wait just a few more seconds. Okay, so I'm just going to look at the results here. Okay, so yes, okay, so more than half of participants here today are subject to a regulation. We still have almost 40% that would say no, and some of you are not sure. And I think this part is really interesting, actually. And this does reflect that there is currently a gap between the involvement of the regulators, where they are identifying as requirements and the extent, the scope of those regulations. So we're going to move on to the next section. So here it's, how far along are you in the process of implementing operational resilience? So just started, still building, almost done. So again, I'm going to give you a few seconds to complete. Okay, I'm just going to wait a bit more. I'm just going to close here. Okay, so still bidding for the majority, which is good. We have some of you guys that are currently done in terms of implementing operational resilience. And I really hope the people that answered done will just share their experience in terms of how they did the implementation, their challenges. Because as I mentioned, we're going to identify some challenges during today's session, but you might have different than that. So really don't hesitate to share your own experience in the chat and talk between each other. So thank you so much for participating in the Vivox. I think this is really insightful. And as I mentioned, we will have two more questions at the end of this session. So it will be the same identification and QR code you'll be able to have access to. So key challenges. As I mentioned, we've identified 6 challenges for today. Of course, there are more than that, different than that. Sorry, but this is the ones that are coming the most frequently, I would say, and the ones that we've identified. So the first one, coordination and governance. And well, this one really ties nicely with the first image that we had of operational resilience that I was showing at the beginning of the session, where we were showing this kind of umbrella covering programs and processes that are in place. Because, well, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We should leverage the tools already in place that are working and that are supported by shared leadership, and that are communicating inside of the organization. The second challenge here, it's really about identification of important business services. And this is the challenge that I mentioned when we look at the statistic that were available in the report, because, well, how do you do it? And what's the difference between an important business service and a prioritized activity they would identify during the BIAs and the risk assessment? So we will provide more example on that later on during the session. Threat assessments, so definitely tied to those important business services mentioned above and should be built on what is already existing. The solution and response planning. So this challenge is also a good way to look at the broader targets of operational resilience, because it's more than just the plan, the BCP. 5, well, of course, we already do exercise and simulation of our plans, well, of our BCP, crisis management plan, etc. But here it's about those important services and proving that you meet the impact tolerances that you've set. 6, meeting conformities and regulation requirements. So just proving that you meet the requirements with evidence that you can provide to the auditors and the regulators, for example. So when we look at operational resilience really globally and the challenge that we're identifying, the different regulation, operational resilience is broader in its scope, but it's more precise in its application. So this is really something just to keep in mind throughout the session. So first challenge, governance. As mentioned, embedding operational resilience in the fabric of the organization is definitely a challenge because, well, where do we start? Who should we include? How to do it? And we know that in order to achieve operational resilience, it must be a joint effort within the organization. And it cannot be happening with just business continuity professional. And therefore, ensuring coordination is really important. And we can tie to a joint governance with a steering committee, for example, and maybe we already have one with business continuity, where we just have some people that are missing from the table. And then it would just be a matter of bringing those people in, bringing them together. And that definitely can be a key success factor here. So when we talk about governance, of course, we look at internal processes, documentation, structures, and yes, for each organization, they have their own context. But as you can see here on the section 2, the example that I have here, we're really looking at the steering committee for the BCMS, for example. And we have the standard rules. So sponsor, business continuity advisor, risk management advisor, information security advisor. So those roles are really quite standard. And yes, for some organization, it could be just a matter of adding in someone new to the role, to the operational resilience role. But not all organizations have the budget for this. So sometimes it could just be a matter of sharing the responsibilities between the roles that are already there, that are already existing, And of course, when we talk about resources, so those roles that you can see here, well, automatically we talk about competencies. And competencies is really highlighted in many standards related to BCMS and IT, for example. So individuals that have their hands in operational resilience should have the opportunity to attend conference on the subject, trainings. They should be able to have a better understanding of what other people in the same position are doing, because we're really in this stage where everyone is not quite sure about anything or how to do it. So exchanging would really be the goal here, internally with external partners as well. And I know many organizations operating in the same sector, having benchmark meetings where they just exchange on best practice, on risk trends and what they should be aware of and how to assess those situations that are quite common in their fields. So really those informal meetings could also be an opportunity here to talk about operational resilience. So here, for example, we have a table that you see here with the events and actions that were taken by the steering committee. And it could be items that would include the operational resilience. So they would be targeted specifically those activities related to operational resilience and the lesson learned that we've found after testing a specific IBS, for example. So this is really something that could be using and leveraging the same processes, the same um, actors that are already there inside the organization. So as I mentioned, it's all about, well, navigating the same waters and using the same roads we've always had, following the update cycle of BIAs and plans, annual testing and exercise. So it's really about maximizing those levers. So important business services. Here I'm using the term important business services more in a general manner, just to mark the gap between business continuity, because of course not all regulation uses the term important business services. But if we just look at the bottom part that we have here, so the IBS and prioritize activity, um, for the prioritized activity, if those activities were to be interrupted, then there would be a high or really high impact on the organization, and therefore an impact on the clients and interested parties. So this would be more related towards BCM, for example. Whereas IBS are the services that, if interrupted, would impact the integrity of the market and would be a direct impact on the clients. So this would be here the difference between the two. And as you can see here above, I do have a table, and this would be the standard example that I'll be using throughout the session today. So we have our service. That would be claims processing, for example. And we've identified this service as customer facing, customer related as its type. So automatically, based on that and the description that is provided, then we consider this service as an IBS. That's why we just check the box. So here we're talking about efficient handling of claims from the initial notification to the settlements, and ensuring customers receive timely assistance and payments. We also have the mention of the peak period, so that would be here continuous. Um, so this one would really be identified here as an IBS. And at the opposite, the standard example for services or process that are not IBS would be payroll, because even though it might be a prioritized activity for the organization, it wouldn't qualify as an important service. It might still be a supporting area, for example, but the exigence in terms of the mapping and the details would be less constraining here. So if we move on to just the impact tolerances, so the impact metrics, I'm sure everyone has one, and that's definitely something that you can leverage when you look at your IBS, for example. So it just be a matter of, for example, adding a new column with the impact on the customer, as well as the description of the impact levels. That way, we could just weed out the non-customer facing services just by using the impacts matrix. And here, as you can see, again, I'm using the example of the claims processing. So we have the claims processing, the service name here. We can see that in terms of the tiering, it's a priority one, so IBS automatically. And then we look more into details in terms of the assessments and the impacts. So based on the categories that we have in our impact metrics, we would be able to say that in terms of financial impact, it would take us 1 week to reach a high or a very high impact if this service were to stop. Customer would be 48, reputation 72, legal 72, and this is how we would get our MTPD here. So the MTPD would be really based on the shortest time frame, which is customer 48 hours. And of course, justification. So in terms of direct impact to the client, to the customer, the duration. So providing some insight regarding this in terms of maximum acceptable delays, the volume, what we should take into consideration, what we should do at the very least, and the service level. So what is the minimum acceptable resolution time and customer acceptation satisfaction rate. So this is really in terms of time frame that we should evaluate our service, but it should also be in terms of level. So here, if we look at the impact category, the financial impact would be low because it's 1 week. Customer, it's very high, reputation high, and regulatory would be high as well. And here, it's really important to note that the justification for the assessment is just as important as the assessment itself. And it's for really compliance purposes, of course, but also as a guideline during tests and exercises. So identification and mapping end-to-end in terms of our important business services. So here, this is really just a reminder that important business services are not pertaining to one business unit. And here I'm using business unit, but terminology could be different depending on your organization. But the service is really across function. And this is really something that we can see here with our yellow column. So this is really a good way to represent this type of information as well, to have a better understanding. So again here, if we just go back to our example, then we have the claims processing, that is our service here, our important business service. But this is, when we talk about operational resilience, well, we have to dig deeper. We really have to do this mapping end to end. That means that we have our important business services, and we need to look at the activities, the processes that are contributing to this IBS. So for example, here we can see that claim notification, document collection, customer follow-up, for example, are contributing to the claims processing IBS. And of course, that also means that we need to do an evaluation, an assessment of the impact for those processes, as well as calculate their own MTPD. Again, justification is really important. And we could also get this type of view here more in terms of a tree chart. So tree chart really allows you to have a high level view of interconnection, of dependencies, of really mapping end to end of this process of this important business services. So here we could see that for the claims processing that has in 48 hours MTPD, well, then we have all of those processes or activities contributing to it. And we have the information in terms of their own criticality. So, oops, I moved too fast here. So when we talk about dependencies, again, the challenge here is, yes, we should identify our dependencies, but how detailed should we be? What should we map? And that means really looking both internally and externally as well. It's really about pushing deeper in terms of the information that we're trying to capture, and those solutions or strategies that are in place, both on our side as well as on the side of the supplier. So again, here I'm using the tree chart view to see I'd say the global information. So we have the claims processing, claim notification, depend on the supplier A, for example. And this is something that could be mapped with the table that you see here, where we have the activity, the process, the claim notification that depends on the supplier A. the need for the supplier A is that they provide call center for claims in both French and in English. And if the supplier is not available, then we need to find our alternate measures, interim procedures. So here it would be, for example, to transfer the calls to an internal call center. And it's also about asking more information. So for example, we could see that the partner here has completed the assessment. So I'll be able to show you the assessment after that. So looking at those external dependencies, but also looking at internal dependencies. And it's not just saying I need this team, for example, and that would be it. No, it's really about saying the relationship here, is it upstream or downstream dependency? Um, which business unit, which team, which department, which function do I depend on? Why do I need them? And do I have something in place if they're not available? And you could even decide to push further here and ask the function, well, what is your MTPD? What is your RTO regarding this service that you're providing? And of course, asking them about SLAs if there are things that are in place. And as I mentioned, the workaround that we see here, the interim procedures, this is something that should also be tested and exercised, but we'll be able to look at that in more details afterwards. And really, all of this could be part of the BA. So when you're doing your standard BA, I'd say the workshop. Well, this is something that you could discuss. You could go into more details when you look at IBS here. It could even be a separate dependency assessment documents. I know that some organizations are splitting those type of information. So if I zoom in on the dependencies to third party here, well, those critical suppliers should also be interviewed really through specific forms. So they should have their own plan, for example, that you'd be able to map out. And of course, getting answers here is really a challenge of its own, but it's also beneficial for them to maintain a good partnership with the organization. And for the ones that are more reluctant, if I could say it like this, well, regulators are planning on being more restrict in their approach in the regulation, and they should soon be the target as well of those regulations. So they're going to be forcing the end of those third parties, and I think especially in the US. So when we talk about the supply chain resilience, as you know, it's really more than asking, do you have a BCMS? And yes, and okay, we're fine with that. It's really about creating a plan specific to our suppliers, as I said, where we look at the service they're providing, the assessment of the MTPD. So for example, here we could see that for our supplier, they're providing insurance result file investigation, storage of physical file. We could see the MTPD 48 and 72 hours. We could also ask them, what is your strategy if you were to not be able to provide this service? So here they could say, we have a secondary site in place. We have other partner or suppliers that we could work with. And it's also about identifying what would be the impact on the company's operation if that service were to be not available. But it's also about asking them, what are your resilience measures that are in place and impact level, preparedness level, based on scenarios that we, as an organization, dependent on you, we've identified are critical for our organization. And this is really the second table that you see here, where we have those, I'd say, standard scenarios. And here we're asking the supplier to assess what would be the impact level for the loss of site, for example. So here they said low because they already have a secondary outsite available. And the preparedness level here is really green because it's documented, it's in place, and they have tested this specific scenario in their organization. But it's also about getting the accurate information from your vendors and your suppliers. So here we're asking, what is the approval date for the information that we're capturing? We also ask him, did you exercise? Did you do testing? If so, then yes. Then when, sorry. And also asking them some comments in terms of, was it a success, a failure? Of course, they will never say that it was a failure, but really getting more information, more insights, and just asking them in terms of plan, do, check, and act. What's the current status? So of course, getting all of that information, it could be part of the contract negotiation process to really have everything that I mentioned here. But again, it all edge on good faith and what they are ready to accept in terms of fallouts. If they're okay with financial penalties, then you better hope you have strong interim procedures in place because you can't really be that dependent on them. This time we're zooming in on IT dependency. And again, here we should just provide more details both at the process level. So for example, here I'm using the system Binatech. Why do I need this system for? What's my request in terms of RTO, RPO as well? Do I have something in place if the system is down? And something that is really strong here. But it's also looking about the RTO gap. So for example, here, um, we've said that we need the system in 24 hours, and the IT team said that the official RTO would be 24 hours. And the gap here, even though it's yellow and we can see that it's matching the two information, this is really just to take into consideration and take into consideration when you're writing your interim procedures that maybe your definition of RTO is not the same as the IT RTO, in a sense that maybe for you is your RTO, it's when you're losing the system, but for IT, it's that they have to first bring back the whole infrastructure, the VPN and all the servers and databases, and then they will do the 24 hours to recover the application. So sometimes there can be a gap here, and this is something that needs to be taken into consideration when you're writing your interim procedures. And it's also something that should be considered in terms of discussion, exchange to have with IT team in terms of what do they mean for official or R2 here. Data classification. So here, for example, we would let the business unit members, the important business services member, identify what is the data classification, because sometimes, well, the SMEs are better at identifying what kind of information is available in the system rather than the IT team, for example. And operational resilience is also about, as I said, it's really more granular and more detailed in terms of the practice. And that's why here we're linking the system to the process, leveraging it. So this is something also to keep in mind here and to keep in mind when we're looking also at the process R2, because it should be matching the two of them. So this is really for more for the business part, I'd say. But we should also provide more details in terms of the IT components. And for example, it's about looking at the system here and the dependencies they have and their ties to other system that they might need, other database and servers that we should identify here. And that's why we have the Binatech highlighting the downstream dependencies to Classic, for example. And what is the dependency RTO? So here, for example, it would be 4 hours. So really being more granular, and this is really related and ties to the ITDR program and the plans we have for our system. Now, if we just move on to threat assessment, and this is really entering another area, I'd say, and it's really about integrated risk management with a focus on operational risk management. And usually this piece here is a well-oiled machine. I think people from the risk team are usually quite efficient in their process. But here we identify interdependencies, sorry, to other risks. So for example, we have our operational risk. We should say that it depends on business continuity risks, for example, and ITDR risk, cyber risk. So it's really about creating a profile for your risk here, mentioning those dependencies, mentioning the link to the strategic plan, for example. And it's also about doing the assessment for a different time of period for how to say for a different horizon here. So a short term and a long term as well. So here, for example, we're using our 3 years as well as 10 years. But it's really about taking into consideration our sectors, our activity, the market, and the impact on the customer. So here we look at the likelihood of insurance risk levels. Those levels as well would be identified. And again, here, engaging with other professionals in the same sector can also support this process and provide the said benchmark. So it's really about establishing this profile at a global level, but we should also be getting input from the SME that are contributing to those important services, because they might have more insights. They could also better orient how we do this type of assessment as well. So if we just continue here for the threat assessment, of course, it means using available tools. So we shouldn't throw the likelihood and consequence matrix that we're currently using. And we also have to look at the multiple locations and do the assessment for those locations as well, because obviously the assessment can be different from one side to the other. And here we're providing a visual view of the information, um, because this is also something that you can leverage in terms of information that you're providing to leadership, to the auditors. And that shows that you know where you're at currently in terms of assessments. And this really ties to operational resilience in terms of documentation. So when we look at scenario modeling, here we really talk about those vulnerabilities and the risk assessment. And this is all of this should be driven by the incident scenarios that you've identified. And here I have some examples. I'd say that those are the standard ones. So the loss of access to premises or loss of access to sites, and loss of employees. For example, disruption of key business partner, loss of essential resources, as well as loss of IT, which then split into, of course, the loss of infrastructure and data service and the loss of data. So again, those are really standard scenarios. We have organizations that have different scenarios, more precise, more detailed, depending on their fields, their sector as well. But this is really just an example here. So the solutions we identify in our plans should be adapted, should be based on those scenarios, and must take into consideration the dependencies that we've captured. So if we go to the solution and response planning challenge. So here the challenge, it really relates to, should we have a different plan specific to operational resilience, for example, and maybe how detailed our solutions should be and what to plan for. So here, for example, this is something that you could find in a business continuity plan, for example, where you'd have the incident scenario. So here we decided to leverage loss of access to site and loss of site, for example. High level, it's to identify a continuity strategy, so work from home. And this is something that should be really high level here. Then it's about, do we feel that this solution is as a green? Do we feel our resilience level is good for this specific scenario? So here we said yes with a green, because this strategy is documented, it's exercise, and we feel it meet the requirements and the impact tolerances we've set. And it's also about maybe providing some recommendation. And once you've set this kind of high level information and summary of the information, then you need to go into a lot more details in terms of solutions that are in place related to this specific scenario. And for each solution we identified here, we need to take into consideration what are our requirements. For example, loss of sites. Do I have vital records? If so, then what is my strategy for this if I were to lose them? If it's paper, should I digitalize everything? Do I have copies anywhere else? So those type of solutions. For the loss of IT system, for example, in terms of scenarios, well, as we saw earlier, we've identified the dependencies to the system, and we've identified the strategies for each one of them that we should activate if this scenario were to happen. And at the same time, here at the bottom part, we have more of a table and a task related to incident management. So if we talk about incident management, then here the example is to, we should be getting to the prearranged meeting place. And here you need to think about, well, what is our strategy to go there, to go to this meeting place, to go to this second site? what is the required equipment, and of course to keep record of the information and the lesson learned just by doing the tracking of those events. Um, and whether it's an exercise or an instance, those events should generate solutions, should generate a readjustment or a validation of the solutions that we have in place, because they might highlight some gaps that we currently have. So definitely something that should be used as well in terms of events and review. The same goes for cyber. So we look at the scenario here, for example, that would be the prolonged outage due to malicious code, ransomware, malware. So we identified our scenarios. And here, as you can see for IT, well, for cyber, it's more detailed, for example. But then once you have this, then it's about identifying those steps, the responsibilities of the relevant party, and being able to just check when this is done to really provide some insight in terms of if there is a gap in those solutions and if we should adjust those responsibilities here. Also, when we talk about cyber and IT, one of the main challenge was the legacy infrastructure. And this is really one of the, as I mentioned, one of the biggest issue in terms of operational resilience. And if we can't change this just by clacking our fingers, well, we can still take into consideration operational resilience when moving to a new system. It should also be part of the discussion that we have with the steering committee, that this is on our radar and we double our attention when this is concerned. But it should also be, it should also go beyond the IT discussion. So the important business services owner should also be aware of this. That way, they could also decide to tailor their solutions and their strategy for this specific incident scenario. So the loss of system or the integrity of the system, for example. So operational resilience is really about exchanging and making sure the information is communicating with everyone that would be that would have a role during the events. Our next challenge here would be scenario tested. And here it's really about the notion of severe but plausible. And I think that this is something that's been talked about a lot here, but it's really about what does it mean? And cross-reference data, okay, but how? Proof of testing, how? So scenario testing is really a combination of the impact tolerances that you've set for your important business services, as well as the incident scenarios that we've identified, so the ones that we had earlier. And finally, it's also the solutions and the dependencies you have. And the mapping of all of that information should provide the severe but plausible exercise you need to do. And something that was mentioned a lot was AI as a great tool, definitely a really great tool to get ideas in terms of exercise scenario, but it should also be used with caution. And I've read that nuclear war was a highly recommended scenario here, but it's definitely the worst case scenario for most of our organization, and it wouldn't bring anything to the table. And we're way beyond the notion of severe but plausible here. So again, with caution. Um, so severe but plausible, for example, it could be if you have a strategy for the loss of a specific system, for example, and it would be to use paper form, and you can do that in 12 hours and then push the information in the system when it's back. Then you can test this specific situation, this specific scenario. And then when it's done, you can document it, or you can decide to see that if there is a gap, for example, you need to identify the improvements, the lesson learned that should be put in place and be included in a review cycle. So it's really about, it could be as granular as this. And here it's more a notion of tests than exercise, because can you do it or not? And for I'd say more high level exercise implicating multiple areas, then the lesson learned should be reviewed during the steering committee. This should be integrated and included. And it should be really an item here to be tracked until it's completed or resolved, because, well, all the right players are already around the table. So if you continue just with scenario testing here, so in terms of reference data, well, The challenge is definitely about the volume of the information, as well as the interconnection. So having the right information and pushing them and pulling them together here. Um, and tools to automate everything are definitely a time saver and an accurate companion for this. So for example, here we just have those two tables where you could see just a report on the exercise that were completed. So we could see the scenario category here, the type of exercise, it was simulation, a tabletop exercise, could be a walkthrough of a plan, for example. We have the name of the exercise, then the dates, the results, number of participants. So really pulling all those high-level information are really important in terms of evidence and proof that you're providing of testing to the regulators and for audit purposes. Um, Cross-reference data is also a good way to see, for example, to determine what should be the scenario of your next exercise. So at the bottom, the second table that we have here, for example, we have the unit that would be accounting and finance. And we could see for this unit, what is their level of resilience for the scenarios that we've identified. And we could see that for the disruption of a key business partner, well, they say that they have a red business level. And this would be the opportunity here to say that either we try to test the scenarios that are in green to confirm that this is really something that has been documented and that it's working. Or we could also decide to go with the red and then try to help them to go from this red to a green, for example. And just by having a walkthrough of their plans or having them test some information or verifying and checking what is the gap here or why there is this specific red. And if it's related to they don't have the information from the vendor and the suppliers, then it would just be to talk about the suppliers and have them providing more information in terms of maybe their SLA, for example. Proof of testing. So this is really about documentation, keeping records of everything. So it's about, we have the system been attacked, for example, should it be tested? Yes. It could be something that would be included directly in the plan, where you could see the DR, was it tested in the past 3 years? So here, for example, it's saying yes in the second table. And we need to have the reference to the exercise that was done. So here that would be the 2.4 that you see here, for example. This would relate to the DR that was tested. So really making sure that we have audit trail and compliance of the things that are done. It's also about the information that we identify during the events, so incident and exercise here. So we have to confirm that the procedures, the strategies that we've identified are correct. And this could be highlighted just via a plan, an action plan, for example. So here, for example, the team, I don't have the name for it, but just the team said that after the Bob White exercise that we see here, they've realized that the strategies are no longer applicable in a post-COVID world. And this is really the lesson learned from the last exercise. And based on this statement, on the description of this, they've decided that they need to discuss the strategies with the steering committee. And this would really activate an action and a review plan of things that needs to be done and completed. So here they could set a target date because they want it to be completed and done by then. And then they could provide more comments and say when it's done. So really just capturing the information. And it's also about just keeping in mind that if you don't meet the time frame that you've set, this is not something that is catastrophic. As long as the issue is identified, the actions are put in place, and the reassessment is done. So I can see that time is really flying, so I'll just go through the compliance tracking. So when we talk about compliance tracking, whether we are a regulated organization or not, we should really document our compliance to the standard and the regulation that we have. And it's really a good way to implement a structure and a guideline in the organization. So here, for example, it's the compliance to the standard ISO 22031. So providing more insight in terms of, do we meet this regulation, this control? Yes and no, but how do we meet it? And really provide more details. Do we take actions? Do we have documents to support this claim? So yes, this is something also that should be documented. Compliance tracking should also look at the KRIs and KPIs that we've set. And we could also decide to set specific metrics for operational resilience, but it could be part of the same cycle of review and the same cycle of assessments. So it's really, it should also be considered to track where you are in your journey, I'd say, to implementing operational resilience. And finally, approval cycle. So operational resilience, it's about making sure you have this audit trail of information, of the review cycle, of approval cycle, about who completed the information, when, and the information here should be accurate, should be up to date. It's about developing processes and methodology to make sure that we follow cycles of review. It could be graphic views as well. That's always a good way to represent information just at a glance here, and flexible reporting based on needs. Um, in terms of compliance, audits, conformity, it's really about being able to provide information that we're looking for. And again, here having a tool is always, as I mentioned, a good thing, because that really helps you into looking for specific information. So for example, here, we just wanted to see the solutions that were put in place after an event, so the IT failure here. And we've realized that we need to review the strategies for the system being attacked. And the action related to this would be to perform tests, for example. So really just matching the information that we're looking for and being able to provide this type of information to the regulator or the auditor, for example. So I really had to rush at the end because I really wanted to hear again from you guys. And Marianne, I think you will be intervening at this point regarding the VVOX. So thank you so much for listening to me talk about operational reasons for 1 hour here. And again, as I mentioned, we just want to hear just a little bit more from you guys. And this is a word cloud, so you just have the option to enter more words as you want to. And Marianne, if you just want to go.
Well, thank you very much, Marianne, for the session. I mean, was lots of movement happening in the chat. We'll also be putting there's a button that's called resources at the bottom of the screen. We'll try to make that available, but otherwise, please reach out to us and we'll make sure that we send you an updated version, because the VVOX won't be present in that resource document. And for the ones who've asked, so please, don't be shy, please put comments, and I believe you can put even more than one comment, so please, go and put some comments in. I know there were some questions regarding kind of raising awareness to the gaps that may exist within the organization. Sometimes we're tempted to show all green because for compliance reason we want to do so, but on the other hand, if there are some vulnerabilities, as Patricia mentioned, put that on the risk register. And the good practice guidelines is a newer version that was published earlier, in November of last year, which actually changed the word embedding to embracing business continuity. So the more people do believe in the value of business continuity and operational resilience, that's also going to, increase our state of readiness, and capability. And there was one comment earlier on talking about that operational resilience, actually an ability of the organization. So definitely that's something that we want to build. And yes, we could have included facility management and operational resilience. That was a great point that was also mentioned. So if people do want to send out, an email to us, I'll put that in the chat. If you want to do that. And are we getting comments? Because I know we're getting to the top of the hour. So
yeah, I think I could close this session.
Yeah, I think well, and thank you very much. Again, if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope you found excellent. We were getting some, IPS, impact tolerances. Definitely a challenge to get, our head around what's actually expected. Did you have another question, Marianne?
Yeah.
There, so the ones that you struggled with, So I think we'll actually, close them by considering the sake of time. So you do have so if you were able to put some in, lucky you. So did you want to say a few words on?
Yes, so yeah, thank you so much for joining the session. There'll be an article available on our website, and this is really just high level in terms of what is operational resilience. As mentioned by Marilyn, we will provide the presentation in the chat. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We love to exchange in terms of new subjects and operational resilience and current subjects in our fields. And yes, if you just want to connect with us on LinkedIn, just don't hesitate. It would be our pleasure to exchange. Thank you so much for participating today. I really wish you all a nice day.
Thank you very much, and I hope you found this session insightful. I'm putting the information in the resources, so if you bear with us, you should be able to go and download it. So now it's available. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for the BCI, and thank you, Marianne.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone.